En primer lugar, en nombre del rector Miguel Ángel Collado, que le hubiera encantado estar aquí, os manda un afectuoso saludo. Yo soy Jordi Gimeno, soy el director académico del vicerrectorado y para mí es un placer sustituirle en un acto además de tanta relevancia. Hoy es el 29º, cuesta hasta decirlo, Seminario de Estudios Autonómicos y además un seminario que versa sobre temas de total actualidad, tanto desde una perspectiva europea, con los dos grandes ponentes que tenemos esta mañana, como desde una perspectiva nacional, en donde se discutirán temas tales como la configuración del Estado autonómico o el desafío, por así decirlo, desafío independentista que está siendo juzgado en la Sala Segunda del Tribunal Supremo. También es un año muy especial porque estamos de cumpleaños, y es el 25 aniversario del Centro de Estudios Europeos, por supuesto con una labor magnífica que realiza mi compañero Isaac y todos los compañeros de Derecho Administrativo de la Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha. Es además un área y un profesorado muy dinámico que siempre está haciendo eventos, además abiertos a la participación tanto de otras áreas como del alumnado. Si quisiera además tener un recuerdo también al profesor Luis Ortega, que es maestro de maestros, además que los tenemos aquí entre nosotros, una persona que ha hecho no solo Derecho Público, sino también Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha, y nos queda su recuerdo principalmente como una gran persona. Y sin más, desearos que sea una jornada muy fructífera, que estoy seguro que lo va a ser, y espero que sigan año tras año renovando este Seminario de Estudios Autonómicos. Muchas gracias.
Me corresponde a mí como director del seminario dirigir unas muy breves palabras, sobre todo para presentar y dar la bienvenida. Bienvenidos seáis todos a esta 29ª edición del Seminario de Estudios Autonómicos, que, como señalaba nuestro director académico, se organiza en el contexto del 25 aniversario de la creación del Centro de Estudios Europeos, fundado por el profesor y magistrado Luis Ortega Álvarez. 29 años, 25 años, para muchos de los que estáis aquí es toda una vida, porque no habéis nacido cuando empezó su andadura este seminario. Para otros es algo menos de media vida, ¿no? Pero sin duda ninguna es mucho tiempo, y más en el caso de una universidad como la nuestra, fundada en 1985, que empezó a andar en 1985. Se podría decir en este sentido que el seminario ha ido acompañando el proceso de creación y de desarrollo del Estado autonómico, también de creación y desarrollo de nuestra comunidad autónoma de Castilla-La Mancha e incluso de nuestra universidad. Se ha convertido en cierto modo en una especie de observatorio permanente de la descentralización territorial en nuestro país, de sus avances, de sus logros, también de sus problemas y de sus posibles soluciones y desde luego de sus retos, a veces parecen imposibles, ¿no?, de afrontar, pero siempre se han ido tratando en este seminario. Basta también con pensar en quienes han pasado por aquí en todos estos años: ministros, presidentes autonómicos, consejeros autonómicos, algunos de los ponentes más relevantes en esta materia, no solo a nivel nacional, sino también a nivel internacional, altos funcionarios de la Administración estatal y de la Administración autonómica, doctorandos. Muchos de nosotros que estamos aquí hoy como profesores consagrados fuimos doctorandos y fuimos también alumnos de este seminario, y sobre todo miles de estudiantes, a los cuales sin duda ninguna les ayudaba a conocer mucho mejor nuestro sistema de descentralización territorial. Siempre digo, cuando pienso en estos casos, en este tipo de eventos que seguimos organizando en la universidad y particularmente en el Seminario de Estudios Autonómicos, que el profesor Luis Ortega tuvo una gran visión de futuro al optar por un seminario de estas características y también al inculcarnos a sus discípulos la necesidad de continuar con la obra en esta materia. Esto es lo que explica, junto con el apoyo institucional y económico de la Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha y de algunas instituciones, particularmente las Cortes Regionales. Aprovecho, tenemos con nosotros a su letrado mayor, aprovecho para agradecer ese apoyo constante año tras año a nuestras Cortes. Esto explica, como digo, o solo se explica si tenemos en cuenta este apoyo institucional, este apoyo económico y desde luego el trabajo denodado de tantas personas. Este año presentamos un programa parcialmente novedoso en un triple sentido. Se mantiene el estudio de los grandes temas relativos a la descentralización territorial, la jurisprudencia del Tribunal Constitucional, la cuestión catalana, que año tras año se sucede en nuestro seminario, el tema local, que nunca olvidamos, y las perspectivas de futuro, pero la novedad está en algunos de los ponentes y sobre todo en el enfoque. tenemos más mesas redondas y más opiniones contrastadas. En segundo lugar, se visualiza también la nueva organización del Centro de Estudios Europeos en estos 25 años, con el nuevo director de investigación, el profesor Luis Arroyo, que va a presidir la siguiente mesa, y con el nuevo secretario académico, el profesor Pablo Meix, que se incorpora en estos momentos, que están también incluidos en el programa. Y en tercer lugar, y yo creo que esta es la gran novedad y el principal atractivo del seminario en esta edición, se ha incluido una primera mesa con una dimensión europea, nada más y nada menos que formada por los profesores Sabino Cassese y Espyridón Flogaitis. Con ello queríamos, de algún modo, visualizar la celebración de este 25 aniversario del Centro de Estudios Europeos, invitando a dos personas que son muy importantes, no solo para el derecho público, sino también particularmente para la Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha. Efectivamente, nos acompañan los profesores, como digo, Sabino Cassese y Espyridón Flogaitis. El profesor Cassese, más allá de ser uno de los mejores juristas europeos de derecho público, es doctor honoris causa por la Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha, por tanto forma parte de nuestro claustro, razón por la cual el profesor Ortega, y esta era una idea suya, quería seguir explotando su sabiduría, invitándolo a estar con nosotros. Él es catedrático de Derecho Administrativo, ha sido magistrado del Tribunal Constitucional y, desde luego, todos los aquí presentes nos hemos beneficiado y mucho de sus ideas, plasmadas tanto en sus libros como en las conferencias que hemos podido seguir. El profesor Espyridón Flogaitis, aparte de ser también catedrático de Derecho Público en Grecia, es director de la Organización Europea de Derecho Público, que es una organización internacional con actividad en varios continentes, dedicada principalmente a programas formativos en materia de derecho público. Grazie, professore, di accettare questo invito e di venire alla nostra università, che è anche la sua università. Siamo davvero onorati della sua presenza fra di noi e siamo lieti di poter dire che lei è professore dell'università, che uno dei più grandi giuristi di tutti i tempi è professore della nostra università. Thank you so much, Professor Flogaitis, for being here once again. It is not your first time between us. Thank you for supporting our university careers. Most of us have been part of the European Public Law Group and its activities. And thank you for continuing to put on us new challenges and new opportunities to grow up as law professors. No quiero cerrar esta presentación, sin duda ninguna, sin agradecer a mis compañeros de la Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha del área de Derecho Administrativo aquí presentes, no solo su presencia, sino el apoyo constante en las iniciativas que realizamos. Ellos también son parte del Centro de Estudios Europeos como investigadores y, por tanto, les agradezco su presencia, su trabajo y su esfuerzo. Por supuesto, al personal del Centro de Estudios Europeos y a nuestros becarios siempre tan eficaces, que son los que hacen posible que año tras año podamos seguir sacando adelante tantas actividades, y particularmente en esta semana, donde empezábamos con un seminario muy interesante a nivel internacional sobre inteligencia artificial y derecho administrativo. Gracias a todos los ponentes de este seminario, algunos ya estáis presentes, otros se irán incorporando. Gracias, Jordi, querido Jordi, profesor Gimeno, por tu presencia, por el apoyo del rectorado, del vicerrectorado. Nuevamente reitero mi agradecimiento a las Cortes. Y desde luego gracias también a todos los participantes, los que estéis aquí presentes y los que después nos podrán seguir porque se están registrando estas sesiones. Gracias, Emilio, que es nuestro cámara, que siempre hace un excelente trabajo. Para mí esto es lo que da sentido a este seminario, el que año tras año podamos juntarnos, los colegas, los compañeros, con algunos de los mejores profesores de Derecho Público, que podamos ofrecer una formación de calidad a nuestros estudiantes y que, desde luego, pues sigamos manteniendo el legado del profesor Luis Ortega. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Professor Martín. Welcome to this first panel of the seminar, which will be devoted to a topic that has been described in rather broad terms. It will be dealing with democracy and rights in Europe. But before beginning with the papers to be delivered by the two distinguished speakers that are with us today, I would like to say some words about them. On my right, I have Professor Sabino Cassese, who, as Professor Martín has pointed out, is one of the most prominent scholars in the field of public law in Europe, and in particular in the field of administrative law. He has been professor in different Italian universities, such as Rome, Urbino, Naples, and he has also been visiting professor and researcher in the United States, in France, in Portugal, and also in the United Kingdom. Professor Cassese holds many honorary degrees, but I also think that the most significant of all of them, at least today, is the Doctor Honoris Causa from this university, University of Castilla-La Mancha. So literally, Professor Cassese forms part of the faculty of this academic institution. I hope that he feels at home today. Beyond the university, and therefore in what we might call the real world, Professor Cassese has held some important offices. For example, he has been Minister of the Italian government, and he has also been Justice of the Italian Constitutional Court. On my left, Professor Flogaitis is Professor of Administrative Law at the University of Athens and is also a member of the Greek Council of State since 2011. He has been visiting professor at different European universities and holds also a doctorate honoris causa from Bucharest and Lisbon. And interestingly enough, he has been and is still member of administrative tribunals of some international organizations, which is a very particular creature of global administrative law, that of administrative tribunals. Professor Flogaitis has also been minister and acting minister in different areas of the Greek government, and is, most importantly, as our academic lives are affected, Director and President of the Board of Directors of the European Public Law Organization. The EPLO is a very unique institution. It is an international organization, as Professor Martín has just said, an organization which is devoted to the creation and dissemination of knowledge related to public law and governance in Europe. And it is also something which is particularly important as regards the topics of this panel. It is also an institution designed in order to disseminate European values, values which are so much related to democracy and also to individual rights. In spite of all this, the main achievements of the two panelists as far as this event is concerned are not only of an academic or a professional nature. They are also related to friendship. Friendship understood here as a moral virtue. I hope that it is not inappropriate to speak about virtue and friendship next to a Greek. And understood, as I've said, as a moral virtue tightly connected to the idea of a good life, And this link between friendship and the aim of pursuing a fulfilling life was a very distinctive feature of Professor Luis Ortega. And therefore it might be sound to speak to say something about this today. Luis Ortega was, as Isaac has said, the founder and the heart of the Center for European Studies, and also the founder and the heart of this seminar. Both Sabino Cassese and Espyridón Flogaitis were colleagues and good friends of Luis. And the wish to remember him, and above all to celebrate his life, is certainly among the reasons that explain that we are today so lucky to enjoy their participation in this meeting. Before giving the floor to the distinguished speakers that are participating in this panel, I wish to say something about this book. I want to strongly recommend this book to the audience. It is the Spanish translation of Sabino Cassese's La democracia y sus límites, Democracy and its constraints, and its limits. And well, I strongly recommend it because it's a very personal and deep investigation about this topic, in which the author explores how democracy is not only supposed to work, to operate in order to structure the exercise of public power on the level of the national state and also on the European arena, but also how it actually operates in the real world. And I think that the book is particularly inspiring because it does not take a perspective or take a look at democracy as something that operates in an all or nothing manner. So it's not something that allows us to conclude that some institution or a certain legal system is democratic or not, but it assumes that it works gradually. And this idea of democracy as a gradual and marginal device is of particular interest in order to assess democracy and legitimacy more broadly in respect to a number of issues that are currently of great interest for us as European citizens, from Brexit to succession, going through issues related to administrative law in Europe, or also within the global executive governance. Thank you very much. And Professor Cassese, you have the floor.
Thank you. I may perhaps. Let me start by saying that I'm very happy to be here speaking of rights and democracy in Europe, two topics which were at the heart of the work of Luis Ortega, a very good friend, both as scholar and as judge. Let me also advise you that I'm slightly changing the title, because the title is Democracy and Rights in Europe. I will speak first of rights and then democracy, and you will understand at the end why I'm changing the order in the title. Now, let me start with reminding you the two basic principles about rights in Europe. Article 6, paragraph 2 of the Treaty on the European Union states, I read, the fundamental rights as guaranteed by the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, and as they result from the constitutional traditions common to the member states, shall constitute general principles of the Union law. And the second, it is Article 52, paragraph 4 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, after having listed all the rights, provides that, I read again, insofar as the Charter recognizes fundamental rights as they result from the constitutional traditions common to the member states, those rights shall be interpreted in harmony with those traditions. Now, where is the peculiarity of those two declarations of the supranational legal order? What is new, what is peculiar of these two statements as compared to national constitutions is the fact that they provide a more complex set of rules, because they recognize that there are there are national traditions that are common to national legal orders. They become principles of European law, and as principles of European law, they put a limitation on national legal orders. So what is peculiar of this new way of approaching the rights, the basic rights, is this two ways from below, it is from bottom up, and then top down, the process by which a new set of basic rights is established. Now, if this is the peculiarity of this new complex legal order, which includes both the supranational and the national, because the two are becoming integrated, it is important to understand what is a tradition, because the common constitutional traditions are important. So what is a tradition, and what does common means? First, the use of the word traditions means that reference must be made not only just to constitutional provisions, what is written in Article 5 or Article 10 of the Grundgesetz or the Italian Constitution, but also to their history, because history is part of the tradition, and implementation, to the set of rules, but also to the relevant customs, practices, beliefs, doctrines, as well as their history. Because, in my opinion, tradition includes scholarship, history, beliefs, and practices. This is one of the reasons why the European Court of Justice, when making reference to common constitutional traditions, has never even mentioned written provisions of national constitutions, because are not just written statements of the constitutions which are important, but is much more than the provision which is written in an article of a national constitution. From this point of view, the use of the word traditions introduces a time dimension into European law. This means that the newcomer of course is the European Union, recognizes the older history of the seniors, and the seniors are the member states, native institutions. From this perspective, the clause, the common constitutional traditions clause, plays the same function of what is called the precedent. Through that clause, the European Court of Justice links its case law to the past case law of the national constitutions and of the national constitutional courts. Reference, from this point of view, to common constitutional traditions plays a role that is similar but temporally opposite to that performed by another clause, the clause that is written in the Treaty of the European Union of the ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. While the first, the common constitutional traditions clause, looks to the past, to the roots of Europe, the second, the ever closer union, looks to the future, because it takes into account what will become the European Union. Now, having in this way so to say, analyzed the concept of tradition, I want now to turn to the examination of the other word, common. What does common mean? And this implies two questions. The first question is the following: how many countries must share a tradition for that tradition to become common? Do we need a majority of countries? Do we need unanimity of countries? A strong majority, a two-thirds majority, or even a minority? And therefore, where does the strength for becoming a source of general principles? You remember the clause, the statement, because they shall constitute general principles of the union's law if they are common constitutional traditions. And the second question is, at which level and how should traditions be examined? Now, I address the problem of the meaning of the term common as the reference to the constitutional traditions common to the member states has been interpreted as a means to guarantee plurality of diversity. I want to quote a short passage from an article by a well-known European scholar, Koen Leenaert. He is now the president of the European Court of Justice, so this is a very authoritative point of view. The European Court of Justice, I read, must provide a uniform interpretation of the laws of the European Union, whilst deferring to the common constitutional traditions of the member state, and, as the case may be, allowing room for value diversity. So the interpretation is diversity and unity. This interpretation overturns the function of the clause, which, instead of being used to refer to the recognition of a common uniform standard, is applied to defer, not refer, but to defer to the various and possibly diverse national traditions. The work of the Constitution of the Court of Justice of the European Union in seeking to establish what are common constitutional traditions, therefore, consists of a process which has been called by our friend and colleague Joseph Weiler, a professor who is well known as a European scholar, not only an American professor. He has called this process a comparative distillation. Comparative distillation. However, is it possible to state that the Court of Justice works out an actual careful comparative study, as for instance does the European Court of Human Rights, I mean the Court of Strasbourg, with the famous consensus theory? No, you know the consensus theory. They look at the national legal system and they try to find if there is a consensus. Well, you know, consensus in international law is a very ambiguous concept. You know, it's not a majority, may be interpreted as a majority, and is not a unanimity, of course. Consensus, in fact, is a lack of a negative opposite point of view so strong to be important, relevant for the decision-making process. Are there leading countries that pave the way and are recognized as being more important for the establishment for a common tradition? Now, I don't have time now to go into the details to give an answer to these two questions, but I can tell you that having examined the approximately 100 decisions taken by the Court of Justice, the Luxembourg Court, on the concept of the common constitutional tradition, I can tell you that the European Court of Justice does not examine if there is a majority of countries where constitutional traditions provide protection for certain rights, but exploits the link put in Article 6, paragraph 2 of the treaty of the common constitutional traditions to the European Convention of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. I repeat, I read again the statement of Article 6, paragraph 2, because I want to remind this link which is established by the European Union Treaty to the Council of Europe basic constitution, as guaranteed by the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights, and as they result from the constitutional traditions common to the member states. In that case, they constitute general principles of union's law. So in a way, you have a kind of a triangle, because you have European law establishing a link with the national law, but also with the European Conventions of Human Rights, which is again a supranational piece of law. And this is what is new in the area of human rights in Europe, and is important because from this you can understand that the usual approach to the relation between state and globalization, state and Europeanization, is not the right, is a wrong approach, because does not consider the possibilities of integration of the two levels of government. Now, the last question on this point is, in which areas the European Court of Justice has recognized the existence of common constitutional traditions? And this is important, although the list of fundamental rights recognized by the traditions common to the member state, of course, can be expanded by the jurisprudence of the Court of Luxembourg. Now, having examined approximately the 100 decisions by the European Court of Justice, I can tell you that they have applied the principle which is established in Article 6, paragraph 2, to 10 areas, 10 basic rights: respect of private life, property, freedom of expression, workers' freedom of movement, freedom of religion, prohibition of discriminations on grounds of age, right to an effective remedy and judicial protection, right to a fair trial, principle of retroactivity of more lenient criminal law, and the principle of the legality of criminal offenses and of punishments. So this is the conclusion of the first part of this intervention. And in this part, I've tried to attract your attention on the peculiarities of fundamental rights as they are established at a supranational level as compared to the basic rights which are established in the national constitutions. Now, I turn now to the other point, which is democracy. You know that Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union states, I read again, the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, and this is what is relevant now, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. And if a member state breaches these values, the Union can resort to a preventive procedure and to a sanction mechanism. And you may know that this has been used in cases related to Hungary or to Poland, and of course in the process which has been terminated recently for the accession of Turkey to the European Union. And also in this case, I want to attract your attention on the peculiarities of the basic principle of democracy in this area. And I want to start now by saying, as a provisional conclusion, that democracy at this level is relevant in two ways. One is the democracy of the supranational organization, and another one is the democracy of the national organization of the national states. The second case is clear. For instance, in the case of the decisions taken by the European Court of Human Rights on the voting rights of the British prisoners, where the principle of democracy is established at a supranational level, not to introduce democracy at the supranational level, but to impose the respect of democracy to the national level, which is in a way a paradox. It's in a way is an oxymoron. Why? Because democracy was born in the national governments. And many people think that the only place where democracy can grow are national governments, not supranational governments. And in fact, you cannot say that there is a universal parliament. But in contradiction with the absence of a universal, of the lack of a universal parliament, you have supranational institutions which are imposing or enhancing national democracy. Now, these initiatives counter the widespread opinion that democracy is a matter only for the state. According to this opinion, national communities or civil societies are inextricably linked to a government. Both society and government are necessarily national. Only the demos, the people, is entitled to choose its own rulers, while the rulers derive their legitimacy from the demos. And of course, there is only a national demos. We don't know the existence of a global or supranational demos, and are accountable only to it. Therefore, there is a closed circuit with which foreign authorities are not entitled to interfere. Now, consider the difference between this approach to democracy and how we approach the rule of law or respect of human rights. 1 century ago, it was a well-established opinion that natural rights did not exist as rights derived from the state, no? Because the state is the only source of law. Now, we accept the idea that there are fundamental human rights which are established outside the state and which can be imposed on the state. But on the other side, We don't accept the idea that there is a supranational or global concept of democracy which can be imposed on the national governments. So in a way, we have a contradiction in our approach to fundamental rights and democracy. We are more open to recognize that there are human rights which are worldwide, universal basic principles which are internationally recognized on one side, but on the other side we are less inclined to recognize that we have a universal concept of democracy or a supranational concept of democracy or a European concept of democracy. Now, on the other side, we have many declarations in the treaties in the European area. The European Convention on Human Rights declares an effective political democracy to be the best way to maintain fundamental freedoms. This is the preamble of the Convention, and refers in Article 6, 8, and 11 to a democratic society, while the Treaty of the European Union, desiring to enhance, I quote, further the democratic functioning of the institutions, this is the preamble, declares that I read again, the Union is founded on the value of respect for democracy, that the functioning of the Union shall be founded on representative democracy, Article 10, and that Article 10, paragraph 3, every citizen shall have the right to participate in the democratic life of the Union, and decisions shall be taken as openly and as closely as possible to the citizen. And the Treaty of the European Union also declares that national governments should be themselves democratically accountable either to their national parliaments and to their citizens. And finally, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union contains a proclamation, Article 14, of respect for democratic principles and commitment to consolidate and support democracy. Finally, Article 3 of Protocol number 1 of the European Convention of Human Rights provides that the high contracting parties undertake to hold free elections. You consider not just the basic principle of democracy, but also free elections at reasonable intervals. So not every 15 years, no, reasonable intervals. By secret ballot, so also the process by which people can vote, under conditions which will ensure the free expression of the opinion of the people in the choice of the legislature. Now, you can see from those statements that, again, we have a problem, which is the problem of a different approach to the concept of democracy. Because you have a body, a supranational body, which does not declare democracy only to be the rule for itself, but to be the rule also for the participating bodies, is the rule of the democracy at the supranational level, but also the rule for the state, so that this must be imposed on the states or can be enhanced at the state level. So, therefore, supranational and European bodies serve to democratize domestic governments. Supranational actors can foster national democracy. which is in a way inconceivable until a few years ago, because the idea was that the demos is only national, and therefore how can you consider the national government not only accountable to its own demos, its own people, but also to another body, so that in the previous times this was considered not to be a more democratic, but a less democratic means, because was a power interfering with the power of the people, yeah? So it was not more democracy, but less democracy. So supranational actors can foster national democracy in many ways, by establishing standards and evaluating best practices. And it is what the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe does. By funding, rewarding, and promoting national grassroots initiatives. And this is what the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights does. By adjudicating cases involving national democratic institutions. Think of the Strasbourg court decision on the voting rights of the British prisoners, which is very important, because you see, you have a supranational body which is calling accountable the national governments, a much older democracy, and telling the British that they don't respect democracy. You can understand the historical contradiction in this, because there is the country which has been teaching democracy everywhere in the world, which is judged by a supranational body where there are 48 countries, young countries, sometimes with no democracy, trying to teach and impose to the British that if they disenfranchise, if they deprive of voting rights the prisoners, this is against democracy. Yeah? And this is the second. The third. The fourth, by helping in drafting domestic legal frameworks, like in the case of the Venice Commission. The Venice Commission is providing constitutional assistance to national legal orders by putting national elections under observation by global institutions, by assisting and supporting national democratic processes, and finally by establishing that democracy is a condition to access global or supranational institutions, and this is the case of Turkey. Why the process, which has been finished now, as I mentioned before, of accession of Turkey to the European Union has been terminated, because Turkey does not respond to democratic standards which are established by the European Union, and therefore the evaluation made year by year by the European Commission reached the conclusion that the Turkish government cannot be accepted as a member of the European Union. If I have time, I want to give just one example, which is the example of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, this is the world's largest regional security organization with 57 participating states. Inside the organization, there is an Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which is based in Poland, which is active throughout the entire area in several fields, including democratic development and elections observations. And this office is organized in several different departments, one of which is the Democratization Department, which focuses on fostering equal participation in political and public life and on promoting democratic governance. Another particularly relevant unit is the elections department of this organization, which engages in election observation and in the creation and implementation of technical assistance projects in the area of the review of elections, relevant legislation, the promotion of domestic observers group. Now, I want to try to conclude in 6 points, because I find that this development of democracy at a non-national or supranational, and I could expand this on the global, this development is important and presents 6 interesting features and paradoxes. The first, supranational institutions often address their action to civil society directly to empower them. Therefore, national governments are at that point under a double pressure from above and from below. Let me give you an example, taking from the global. The UN Democracy Fund, the United Nations Democracy Fund, what does it do? They provide money, one example, association of women at a national level in order to finance their newspapers, in order to fight, in order to get the right to vote to female, yeah? In cases where you don't have the women's right to participate to political life. Now, in a case like this one, you have a double pressure, because you have on one side the pressure from below because there is an association, but also the pressure from above because the UN is financing those, is promoting and financing those associations, and the state, which is in the middle, is of course under this double pressure from the UN Democracy Fund and from the National Association. Second point, although democracy is traditionally generated by the people in a national context, it may also be encouraged, imported, transplanted, promoted, assisted, and controlled from the outside, which of course was considered to be a non-democratic means of promoting democracy until a few years ago. Because if a national government has to be accountable to its own people, this is an exclusive link of accountability of national government to people. So democracy is not necessarily only the outcome of domestic political processes without any influence by actors outside the national state. Third conclusion, in this context, we are witnessing the paradox of a set of new global and supranational institutions that are not entirely democratic, because there is no universal parliament. The UN Democracy Fund was established by the UN, but the UN are not accountable to the people of the world, so they are not entirely democratic, but that promote, assist, support, and judge long-standing and well-established national democracies. So that you have the USA saying, why do you want to impose democracy while we have been teaching democracy to the world since more than 2 centuries. Fourth conclusion, by upgrading national democracies, supranational bodies assist domestic publics to achieve goals that they would otherwise have difficulty realizing. Fifth conclusion, democracy enhancing supranational policies are not justified only in terms of democracy. There is an additional reason, their capacity to maintain peace, given that democracies are supposed to be more peaceful. And final conclusion, there is no doubt that the role of transnational actors in contemporary democratization processes is increasingly important, and that democratization and economic reform can be affected by an external actor. In conclusion, supranational interventions as foreign interventions do not necessarily entail a loss for democracy. On the contrary, they can protect or even promote it and can compensate for the powers that have been removed from national democracies. My final and overall conclusion is that we must start to look at fundamental rights and to look at democracy in an entirely new way. That when I speak of the politological and the political science and the legal scholarship in these 2 areas, fundamental rights and democracy, we are outdated. We have to update our approach to these 2 basic principles, because the world is becoming more complex, and the importance of this complexity is clear in these 2 areas. Therefore, we need more research, more scholarship, and so there is room for young minds to work on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear friend and President Luis Arroyo, for giving me the floor. I am here to remember my friend Luis Ortega Álvarez, whom we became friends with in the 70s in Rome. In the 70s, in the year 76, 77, the university was occupied by the autonomy. And so we couldn't get into the university campus for a whole year. And our professor, Massimo Severo Giannini, suggested to us and introduced us to the Biblioteca della Corte dei Conti. And the director of the Biblioteca della Corte dei Conti, who was a professor himself, he used to stay long hours also in the afternoon when the library was closed. And he made 2 exceptions, one for Luis and one for me. And we used to spend there hours, and so we became friends. Later, we joined forces within the European Group of Public Law, and we renewed our old friendship, and I had the opportunity to enjoy this multi-talented personality of Luis Ortega. My problem is, dear President, that I was foolish enough to accept to be on the same panel with Sabino Cassese, who is not one of the best, but the best of the world. So what can I say now? He said everything. So my first temptation was to be prepared to say, thank you, Sabino, I agree with you. And so to avoid to get into the adventure of trying to say a few things about the theme. However, I have here prepared some notes which cross or do not cross with our professor. I was his pupil in those years, and I've been his pupil all my life, I think. Democracy and rights. Well, democracy is a concept and a word which is coming from my country, Greece. And I can assure you that it could not be otherwise, because democracy, in my way of seeing things, is the result of more or less the Greek condition. The Greeks invented the idea that the human beings are values per se. And if the human beings are values per se, then they are equal, because they incarnate the same value. And if they are equal, it is only one way of governing those equal men to propose as a system of government. You will remember that the Greeks in the ancient times, they went from monarchy to oligarchy and then to democracy, aristocracy, democracy. It depends on the city. But the main idea in all those systems is that, that the human beings are equal, and that individualism is at the basis of this equality. The Greeks did not invent individualism. They just, the individualism is what characterizes a Greek. The Greeks are individualists in a way which no other nation that I know of can conceive. Perhaps from my experience, the Italians are so much individualists as the Greeks. So in the 6th century before Christ, when there was a political war between two aristocratic families in Athens, the leader of one of them, Clisthenes, had the idea of appealing to the people in order to win his opposite. And he went to the people and said, come with me, and we're going to govern together. Everyone is going to be in government. Democracy is going to be our system. So it was a kind of suicide of the aristocratic system in order to gain power. And so Athens went into democracy, where everyone was equal to everyone and could equally to everyone contribute to the decisions of the city in every branch of government, for the legislation, the executive, the judiciary. I should remind you that in order to obtain at the departure point true equality in terms of democracy, the legislator Solon introduced a special legislation according to which, as from that moment, nobody was owing not a penny to anybody. that was called sisachia, if you remember the word. Sisachia means that we have a departing point where we don't have debtors and creditors, because the idea was that there were the poorer people who were indebted to, they had taken loans from the aristocrats. So in order to obtain equality, nobody would pay any penny to anyone. And this is important as a lesson for modern times. Well, don't believe, please, that this democracy was the system only of Athens. We had various systems of democracy in the various cities, but they were democratic all the same. For example, in Xenophon, you can read excellent pages about the democracy in Sparta. Sparta had two kings, and but they also had the demos, and they had their peculiar way of exercising democracy, but they were a democracy all the same. And they will remind you, for those who remained under kings, for example, Macedon had a king when they did not have kings in the most of the cities of Greece anymore. This king was not the medieval king or the post-medieval king that we know from the history of Europe. He was an equal man to anybody else. To give you an example, when Alexander the Great loses his father, and the cities in the south of Greece revolt, he's very young, 19 I think, or 20. He takes his army, he goes down, he goes to Thebes, he destroys Thebes, he destroyed it, except the house of the poet Pindarus, because he admired him. And then he goes to Corinth, and he convinced the Greeks. The Greeks say, well, Alexander, you are the leader of all of us. It's okay. Well, we were making jokes. Go on. He said, no. I want to be elected by you to lead the campaign. He was a king who wanted to be elected. And this king, if you read the history of this man, his king was governing, of course, with his way of thinking and his education and everything, and his leadership, but he was dialoguing with his soldiers. He knew them one by one by name, and he was giving a report to them about what he did. Once he had to appeal to them and said, who is more wounded among us? I have more wounds than you. So you see, that's the cradle of democracy. This strange society which existed in those days, and for the failures of it, still exists in modern Greece. Now, the democracy had a rebirth, was reborn thanks to the French Revolution. The French Revolution took all those ideas, modernized them, and brought up the idea that we are all equals, that we are represented in the state, and the nation is the state. We have rights, we have a declaration of rights, and we govern through representatives. The idea of governing through representatives was not French, of course. It was a technique which was borrowed from the United Kingdom, from England. It is not true that that modern democracy was conceived by the English. What the English conceived was the representative system, governing through representation. And actually they created a very strange system of governance, because nobody says that the people is sovereign, but everybody says that the parliament is sovereign. At the same time, the Queen is sovereign, and in a very strange canvas of institutions, all of which together are what we used to call a state, but in a very strange way, because you have at least two sovereigns on the same territory. It reminds me a little bit the Senatus Populusque Romanus, the idea of the Romans, where the state was an addition of institutions rather than one institution with many organs. So the French take the idea of the representation, and they create the idea of representative democracy. And this representative democracy would be based on a declaration of human rights. However, they did not have a clear idea of the enforceability of those rights which were declared. Well, was this part of the Constitution? Was not part of the Constitution? What is it exactly as for its legal characteristic? In Germany, things are different, because Germans, of course, followed the Enlightenment, and they became also Democrats. However, they never, up to today, from what I know, of what I think I know, they never abandoned the idea that there is a distinction between Staat and Gesellschaft, between the state and the society. According to the Germans, the state exists because it exists. According to the French, the state is all the people together represented into a state. But the Germans says, no, there is an antagonism between the society and the state, because they never wanted to abandon the feudal roots of the state. And so democracy coming from Greece took its forms of today, especially, as I said, through what was taught by the French Revolution. Now, if we come to the rights, which is the second component of our discussion, the French Revolution, again, brought to the continent the idea of the rule of law and the idea of the rights, both of them from England again, the birthplace of those ideas in post-feudal Europe is England once more. Sometimes we need to remember that if we go to ancient Greece or to ancient Rome, you don't find a strong discussion about rights towards the state, because the democracy was in the hands of the people. They were not opposing themselves to the state. They were not fighting against the state. They were not afraid of being and needed to be protected against the state. But now it is different, because we had the feudal times, and then you had the absolutism of the 17th century. And the French take this idea of the rule of law in the sense that everyone is subjected to the law, including the producer of the law, including the sovereign, and there is a system of rights. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that in England, they did not have a list of rights. They have good judicial practices protecting the civil liberties. But the French had now a list of a declaration of human rights, and it is very funny, as you all know, to read the British saying that the French fanfarons like to write lists which they do not apply, while we, the British, we don't have lists, but we have a true protection. Now, true protection or not, I don't know, because it was only in 2000 when, as they brought back home the Bill of Rights of the European Council. Well, the rights developed during the years since the French Revolution, again, once more in Germany, as a dialogue with the state and in defense to the state. And we came to the idea of the universality of the Bill of Rights, which was proclaimed by the United Nations par la plume of René Cassin, who wrote the declaration. Now, something very important happened before the Second World War, and this marked what is happening today. And I'm coming close to to the end of my intervention. What happened was that in between the two wars, there was a big uncertainty as for the forms of democracy. What is democracy? We had new ideas circulating. For example, corporatism, as opposed to the idea of one man, one vote. Corporatism was very influential. It is surviving today in many countries as a form of government, at least in certain aspects of it. And but then you had two major movements which marked in between the two wars, fascism and Nazism. All of us remember that Nazism came to power through elections, and they marked with barbarism a very important part of the human history. Things which were done by Nazism had never been again in the past, and the rights did not exist at all. So with the collapse of those two systems, thanks to the victorious Second World War, in the new era, a new necessity for defending the rights came up. For the first time, it was understood that the rights are more important than democracy, because we had lived the era where legislation was foreseen how you deal with a human being, for example, a Jew, when you take him up to the moment of extermination, article by article. I mean, never human beings had done something like that before. Or in my poor country, they exterminated entire villages. They killed everyone above 10-year-old because one German was killed in the mountains by the guerrilla. So things were done which never had been done before. And so the rights were the first priority. And democracy after the Second World War became more a technique of governance and less, if I may, an ideology, because democracy was replaced gradually by governability. It started with Germany. The fundamental, the Grundgesetz, it guarantees democracy, but it guarantees more governability. The idea went from there to other countries like France or Greece, and and governability is not always very compatible with what used to be understood as democracy before. For example, in my country, if you present a motion of censure and you fail, you cannot, no other motion of censure can be produced in the next 6 months. The government is guaranteed, and no matter how many votes they have in parliament. So this is a technique which guarantees the governability, but it is a new form of democracy. Now, the rights need to be protected. And a new idea came in that the warrantor for the rights are the judges, constitutional courts or Supreme Courts, but nobody anymore talks of the times where the guarantee of the human rights was the British Parliament. Before the Second World War, before up to the 80s, the idea in England was that you don't need an administrative law because you have your MP to go to Parliament and control the government. Now, the idea is that we have expert people, the judges, but the judges are not elected. And the judges think like judges. And for myself, despite the fact that you mentioned that I serve in various tribunals, I don't like to think as a judge, to be honest. It's better to think like as a professor. And from this, what comes up is that we are living in another era of democracy through the protection of the rights. And the idea which comes up is the democratic principle, a vague and at the same time not vague idea that this democratic principle must be reflected to every institution, and that this is the important today, not the techniques, not the specific way the democracy is working. I'm not sure that I am happy with that, but I don't know if there is any answer different to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Both papers have been particularly brilliant. I think Professor Cassese has presented an extremely interesting view on rights and democracy in the national, European, and at the final part of his paper, also global arena. And well, it was such a pleasure to listen this clear and illuminating view on more than 2 millennia of history related to rights and democracy. We have now some minutes to open the floor for questions to the panelists. I can see already, Pablo makes.
I was saying that I really feel privileged to be here today and listen to these 2 wonderful lectures, and of course meeting Professor Cassese and Professor Flogaitis after, I think, perhaps 10 years since the last time. I have enjoyed the 2 lectures very much indeed. I would have 2 very brief, I will try to make them brief, questions or points of view. One concerning rights and one concerning democracy or representation in particular. Concerning rights, Professor Cassese has identified, I think, several areas of consensus. And one of them was freedom of religion. And of course, I couldn't agree more, but I think there are still some important tensions that have not been resolved in Europe. For example, if we look at the case law of the European Court of Human Rights that Professor Cassese also mentioned, well, we find some cases where states are allowed to, well, it is Italy particularly, to use a particular symbol of a religion in schools, in public schools, which for me is a strong tension from the point of view of freedom of religion. I agree that freedom of religion is generally protected in every state, but I think perhaps from the point of view of symbols we may have some tension there. And I would be very interested in hearing your opinion on the subject. And secondly, both speakers have addressed the issue of representation, and for me at the European arena it is the political parties that are absolutely crucial. I think we may have a problem of accountability, of democratic accountability in Europe, because our European political parties are probably a reflection of national priorities. And maybe we can see this also in the candidates that are often presented to the European Parliament. So would a stronger effort in making true European political parties help improve or boost democratic accountability in the European arena? Thank you.
Is there any other question? I have some of them, but I would like to add only one to the question posed by our colleague Pablo makes. Actually, it is not a question; it is simply to put a topic on the table. A topic that has been brought about in the book of Professor Cassese. Professor Cassese has been in this book rather critical towards an inadequate expansion of democracy and in particular representative logics in areas of the state that had been traditionally connected not so much to democracy, but to other dimensions, to other elements of the let's put it in these words, the traditional constitutional theory, and in particular towards the realm of the judiciary on the one hand, and also the public administration itself. And I think that this is a problem that we can observe in every contemporary democracy, and maybe the panelists want to say something about this.
I want to make two remarks. The first one is about the first point that you made, Pablo. I think that from a methodological point of view, we should consider the process of democracy building and the process of building democratic structures in two ways. One is the machinery of democracy, and the other one is the output. Now, my focus was on the machinery, and I'm quite satisfied with the machinery. My focus was not on the output, because the output is still lacking, yeah? Because British prisoners still don't have voting rights, you see? That's a problem, yeah? So we are looking at a process which is good in principle, but is not implementing really those principles. The machinery is good, the output is not yet there. My second remark has to do with the two combined interventions, and raises one major question. Is democracy only representation? Is democracy only election? I mean, most of the people think that democracy is election, yeah? But take Schumpeter. Schumpeter was a great economist from Austria, and he became an American, and he wrote a book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And the point that he makes in that book is that democracy is also mainly competition, because political parties compete in order to get support by the people. Yeah, in a way, they want to buy popular votes. Yeah, they want to buy popular support. And there is also another concept of democracy, which is democracy as countervailing powers, checks and balances. No, countervailing powers was the expression used by another economist, Galbraith. No, so we cannot focus only on representation as the major means of democracy. And the second point I want to make is that representation is not representation as we think is representation. The Germans, they have two different words, Vertretung and Repräsentation. Vertretung is the representation in private law. No, I give you the power to act in my name. Most of the people think that political representation is this, which is a mistake, because when we vote, we are not delegating somebody, yeah? We are just choosing. Therefore, I think that when we approach the topic of representation, first we have to distinguish between the representation in private law and in public law. The representation as a means of democracy is quite different from choosing and delegating somebody to act in a name. Our name, I mean by people's name. And second, we have to take into account another point which is not considered enough in the literature, which is that at the very beginning, elections were limited to very few people. I once tried to understand how many votes got Alexis de Tocqueville. You may know that Alexis de Tocqueville, he was a member of the parliament when he came back from the UK, from the USA, having written the famous La Démocratie en Amérique. No, he became a member of the parliament. Now, there are historical accounts. He was elected with no more than 200 votes. 200, yeah? It means there were very, very few people. They know personally each other. Was it just... Now, the great change in this history of democracy was universal suffrage. When you move from 1,000 people having voting rights and you go to millions of people, at that point, democracy was in the hands of political parties. Now, the real problem of democracy now is that political parties are disappearing in the world, not only in one country or in another country, but are really disappearing everywhere. So therefore, the real problem of representation now is that we are missing the link between society and state. The parties were, in a way, in the middle between society and the state. Now, parties are, the famous sociologist who died recently, Zygmunt Bauman, wrote, they are liquid. They are disappearing. Yesterday we were talking about this, and let me give you an example for Italy. The three major parties in Italy after the Second World War had 4 million members. Now the total of Italian political parties don't have more than 500,000 members. So this means that the political parties are disappearing. So the process of democracy, which was based on the political parties as the middleman, the go-between between society and the state, is becoming a crucial point. And nobody in the world knows where are we going in this situation. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the interventions. I would like to make 2 comments, or 1 comment with 2 aspects. After the first Persian War, Aeschylus wrote Perses. Perses is a tragedy which I believe should be taught to any of our schools, because he codifies what is the difference between the Western society, as it was his society in those days, and the intruders, those who came from the East. And I remind you that Aeschylus had fought personally in Marathon, and his brother Kinegiros was dramatically killed in that battle. And Aeschylus says in his own way that we are a society of free men, they are slaves. And he thought that the fact that we are free men and the fact that they are slaves is in the mind of everyone. It is deeply rooted. It is not just a political coincidence that they were conquered. We are a society of individuals, and they are a society of a mass. And actually, there is a very nice discussion between the mother of Darius and the people. And the mother of Darius says, well, what are those Greeks? Are they good? And the people answers, each one of them is not inferior to any one of our people. But when they are united, they are invincible. So this is the way Aeschylus describes our way of developing a society. This that Aeschylus describes now goes to every one of our societies. And every one of our societies has differences in history, mentality, the way the societies were brought up. And I'm sure that this kind of democracy, which is based on this value, because our theme is democracy and rights in Europe, cannot be understood the same way in Greece, where we risk not even to have a state because of the individualism, or in Germany, where they think it is their duty to go and vote, or in Russia, where if you are in the hierarchy, you are better, you are more clever, you are even more beautiful, considered to be. So, and it is to be applied, but it is not applied the same way. And of course, this we need to understand, because that's the human condition. But what remains very, very important, I believe, for all of us to think about later, is that the dichotomy made by Aeschylus, especially with the geographic division, still remains. I mean, go to Iraq to apply democracy a la Greek. It's impossible. Impossible. As it were in those days. Herodotus described those societies exactly as they are today. And this is something which all of us who are promoters of democracy, democratic values, human rights, etc., need to preoccupy us, and because there are questions to be addressed. Now, one last thing. In the recent years, something new has happened. And the new which has happened is the easy communication in the social media. This did not exist when I was a student of Professor Cassese. Today, every stupid person or every clever person stays in his computer or in her computer and communicates with the world. And eventually they talk among themselves, they create groups, and they find themselves as being right in what they say. And this influences the traditional way of understanding democracy in Europe. And because I was said by our common friend Giuliano Amato that when they go in, Giuliano Amato told me, Sabino, and perhaps you can confirm that when the members of parliament are about to vote something, they receive on their telefonini, they receive thousands of tweets. Don't do that. So, thousands. They may receive 1,000 of tweets. They are afraid of those 1,000 tweets, and they don't think that there are many millions which do not use tweets to send them and threaten them. So this is a new era for democracy, and democracy is unprepared to do that. And So we have new practices. I don't know what the answers will be to that, but I guess that those new practices will be inevitably part of modern ways of doing democracy, whether I understand them or not. Thank you.
It is time to close the panel, but I don't want to do it before saying how much grateful we are for your visit, for your lectures, and also for your wish to remember Luis Ortega together with us. It has been very, very nice. Thank you very much. And now we are going to make a break for a coffee, and the next lecture will begin at 12:45. 12:45. 12:45, ¿vale? Muy bien.